There is an old saying, an arrow may seem simple, but in the hands of a genius, it can change the world. That was what people believed when they saw a young man named Yoo Sang-hyun. From an early age, he was recognized as a rare talent. The bullseye was his closest companion, and every arrow he released felt like a miracle. He even became the youngest national champion, earning the title the media gave him, the Hope of Korea. Yet behind the cheers and applause, no one knew that fate was preparing a trial. Yoo Sang-hyun experienced an accident, the worst nightmare that haunts every athlete. A severe injury to his hand meant he could no longer draw the bow properly. For an archer, that was the end of everything. With no other choice, he had to retire early, leaving behind the world of archery that had been his whole life. Now, Yoo Sang-hyun lives his life as an office worker. The job wasn't something he earned through his achievements, but rather a position granted thanks to the recommendation of his former coach, who still cared for him. By day, his life seemed normal, but at night, it was different. Every night, Sang-hyun sat in front of his computer, immersing himself in the world of game streaming. Thousands of people watched as players used the latest technology, Full Dive. Full Dive was a cutting-edge capsule that allowed players to truly enter a game's world, to feel every movement as if their own bodies were inside it. For gamers, it was the ultimate dream. And for those who couldn't afford it, a living nightmare. For Sang-hyun, who only worked part-time and earned just enough to get by, the price of a full dive was far out of reach. All he could do was watch, observing others enjoy the freedom of the virtual world. But deep within his heart, there was an envy he could never quite hide. And every time he saw a player raise a virtual bow and let an arrow fly freely, his heart trembled. The next day, the director of the company called Sang-hyun into his office. Without any pleasantries, he was given two equally bitter choices. Sang-hyun, it would be better if you resigned now. We'll give you severance pay as compensation. But if the company goes through restructuring and you're laid off, you won't get anything. The reason cut deep. They claimed Sang-hyun was incompetent, and with only a high school diploma, the company saw him as nothing more than a burden. With no other option, Sang-hyun signed the resignation papers. His heart screamed. Why was the world so unfair? Simply because he was born into an ordinary family, every step of his life seemed so much heavier than others. Yet in front of the director, he could only bow his head. Patiently, and with quiet sorrow, he accepted it all without resistance. That day, Sang-hyun walked home, empty-handed and with a heart far more hollow than before. When he finally arrived home, Sang-hyun let his body collapse onto the old mattress. His empty gaze drifted up to the ceiling, and slowly, his mind wandered back to the past. Back to the moment he stood on the podium, receiving the gold medal at the National Archery Championship. The cheers of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the overwhelming pride. That was the happiest moment of his life. Now, it was nothing more than a memory. He closed his eyes and asked himself, what should I do? Now, just to survive? Then, in the middle of his storm of thoughts, his phone suddenly buzzed. A notification popped up from a streaming platform. A famous streamer named Bubblegum was live. Thousands of viewers filled the chat room, donations pouring. Endlessly, while Bubblegum laughed freely as he played a VR game. Sang-hyun stared at the screen for a long time. The sting of envy pierced his heart once more, especially when he saw the streamer casually wielding a virtual bow. And at that moment, an idea sparked in his mind. What if I tried becoming a streamer too? Not just any streamer, but someone who could truly master archery, even inside a VR world. Maybe this was the path. To use the skill he had honed his entire life, not in a stadium, but on a brand new stage called streaming. The next day, Sang-hyun met his old friend, Ju-hyuk. They had known each other for years, even working at the same company in the past. With excitement in his voice, Sang-hyun shared his idea of becoming a VR game streamer. But Ju-hyuk's reaction was far from what he expected. What? You? Streaming VR games? Ju-hyuk stared at him in shock. Hyun, you're not even a gamer, and you know very well how expensive those VR capsules are. Yet Sang-hyun's resolve was unshakable. He was determined to spend all his savings to buy a VR capsule. Even if it meant starting his life from zero, he believed this was his only path. Later that afternoon, the two met again. This time, Joo-hyuk took him to a small second-hand VR capsule shop run by an acquaintance named Lee Kong-suk. The place was modest, yet crowded with dreamers, people who all wished to become pro gamers or famous streamers. Before handing over the capsule, Lee Kang-suk ran a biometric test, a mandatory procedure to record the user's physical information and personal data, allowing the capsule to connect directly with the owner's body. As Sang-hyun lay down inside the capsule for the trial, Kong-suk leaned toward Joo-hyuk and whispered quietly, "Tell your friend not to get his hopes up too high." Many people buy these capsules, believing they'll shine in the VR world. But once they try, most of them fail, and what's left behind is nothing but regret. And finally, the day had come. Sang-hyun lay down inside the VR capsule, closed his eyes, and slowly, his world began to change. When he opened them again, he was already standing inside a grand arena. A massive stadium, roaring with cheers, lights shining brightly above. His very first game was none other than virtual archery. Sang-hyun froze, his eyes trembling with awe. Everything felt so real, as if he had returned to the Olympic tournament he once could only remember in his dreams. His hands quivered as he gripped the virtual bow. He tried to recall the sensation he once mastered in the real world. But doubt whispered inside his heart. Can I still do this? Am I truly the same as before? Outside the capsule, Joo-hyuk and Lee Kang-suk watched the monitor closely. "He looks nervous," Joo-hyuk muttered. "That's normal, especially for beginners," Kang-suk replied. Then, shret! The first arrow was released. Teng bullseye! Dead center. Joo-hyuk's eyes widened. Lee Kang-suk blinked in disbelief. Sang-hyun took a deep breath, then drew another arrow. Second, third, fourth. Every shot struck perfectly at the center. Target. The room fell silent. At last, Lee Kang-suk spoke, his voice filled with awe. "Who is this man really? With skills like that, it's almost a waste he's only buying a second-hand capsule." Joo-hyuk gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "You don't know. He was once called the Hope of Korea." Lee Kang-suk fell silent, overwhelmed with respect. Meanwhile, inside the VR arena, Sang-hyun stood tall with his bow in hand. When he finally emerged from the capsule, tears streamed down his cheeks uncontrollably. "At last," he whispered softly. "At last, I can feel it again. Even if it's only in a virtual world." That day, Sang-hyun wept, not only from sorrow, but because for the first time in so long, he had once again felt the heartbeat of a true archer. Thanks for watching, Hunters. Drop a like, smash that subscribe button, and let's hit the target together in the next chapter. Until then, stay sharp and keep aiming high.